I never planned to end up on that lonely stretch of coastline, clutching a thermos of my husband's favorite ginger tea while my heart pounded like it already knew the truth. Daniel had left 2 days earlier for what he called a much-needed fishing retreat, a quiet break from the noise of boardrooms and billion-dollar negotiations. I only wanted to surprise him, to remind him that even in his world of private jets and cold marble, he still had someone who saw the man beneath it all. But the moment I stepped onto the dock, nothing felt right. The boat rocking unattended, footprints in the sand that didn't match his, and a single glove drifting in the tide like an omen. I thought I came to bring him comfort. I didn't know I was about to uncover everything he'd hidden from me. What I found that day changed our marriage forever. I first noticed it on a Wednesday morning, the kind of morning where the city looked painted in soft gold, but somehow our penthouse felt colder than the glass that framed it. Daniel stood by the window with his coffee, staring at the skyline like it was slipping away from him. He didn't hear me walk in. He didn't even flinch when I touched his shoulder. And in that tiny pause before he finally turned around, something in my chest tightened, because I realized he wasn't really with me, not the way he used to be. He forced a smile, the polite kind strangers exchange in elevators, and said, "Did you sleep well?" It should have been a simple question, but his voice carried that distance again. Thin, tired, stretched like a thread about to snap. I told him yes, even though I hadn't. I'd spent half the night watching the glow under his office door, listening to the restless pacing he thought I couldn't hear. The soft tapping of his pen, the low sighs, the quiet shift of drawers opening and closing, sounds of a man searching for peace and not finding it. He left early that day, brushing a quick kiss across my cheek before I could look too closely into his eyes. They used to hold warmth, curiosity, playfulness, that spark he always claimed I brought into his world. Now they held something else entirely, a hesitation, a weight, an unspoken question he was too proud to voice. The elevator doors closed behind him, and I stood there barefoot on the hardwood floor, feeling the echo of a goodbye he hadn't said. I tried convincing myself it was just stress. Billionaire stress. Boardrooms, shareholders, unpredictable markets, things he carried like a second skin. But that evening, when I set out his favorite dinner and waited, the minutes stretched into hours. By the time he finally walked through the door, his shoulders sagged, his tie loose, his expression buried under exhaustion. "I'm sorry," he whispered, barely audible. "Work ran long." He didn't take a bite. He barely tasted the wine he claimed was his favorite. And when I reached for his hand, his fingers tightened around mine for a moment, then slipped away as gently as a page turning itself. That was the moment I knew something real had shifted. But still, I tried to breathe warmth back into our home. I lit the candles he liked, played the jazz records we used to slow dance to at midnight, even rearranged the living room the way he once said felt more open. He didn't seem to notice any of it. He drifted in and out like a guest passing through, and though he never raised his voice, the silence between us grew sharp like it could cut if I leaned on it too hard. One night, while he lay with his back turned to me in bed, I listened to the faint tremor in his breathing. Not sleep, not awake, something in between. I quietly asked, "Daniel, are you sure you're all right?" His answer came seconds later, too delayed to be believable. "Yeah, just tired." His voice cracked on that last word, so softly he probably didn't hear it himself. I did, and I recognized it. Because I'd heard that same crack in my mother's voice years ago, on the nights she thought she could hide her disappointment, her loneliness, her fear that the world might abandon her again. I swore I would never let silence build walls in my own marriage. I swore I would never live waiting for someone to come back to me. So, when Daniel told me over breakfast that he'd be taking a fishing trip, just a few days to clear my head, I latched onto the idea before he finished the sentence. I watched his hands as he spoke. They fidgeted with the mug, tracing the rim, tapping the handle, restless. Fishing had been his escape since childhood, something peaceful, grounding. I smiled and told him it sounded good. He smiled back, but the sadness behind it hit me harder than the words he wasn't saying. Right then, an idea rooted itself inside me. If he needed space, I would give it, but not from afar. I would meet him there, surprise him the way he once surprised me on my 26th birthday with a rooftop dinner he made himself, even though he nearly burned the stakes. I wanted that man again, the one who saw me in color, not in passing glances. Maybe seeing me in a place that meant so much to him would remind him of us, of what we were before the world started pulling at his edges. That night, when he left for his trip, I waited until the elevator doors closed before I ran to pack. His favorite ginger tea. The wool sweater that matched the one he bought for himself. Homemade sandwiches wrapped in foil the way he liked, with little notes tucked inside. I even packed the old Polaroid camera we used on our honeymoon, its worn leather strap still smelling faintly of sunscreen and ocean. Before sunrise, I slipped into my car, the city still sleepy behind me. As I drove, the air grew cooler, filled with the scent of pine and distant salt. The sky slowly blushed from gray to pale gold, and for a moment, I let myself imagine his surprised smile when he saw me. I imagined him pulling me close, that spark returning, the two of us laughing about how I'd managed to track him down. A soft warmth filled my chest, carrying me down winding roads. But as the miles stretched on, that warmth tangled with something else. A small, unsettled knot I couldn't quite name. I rolled down the window to breathe in the ocean wind, hoping it would calm me. It didn't. Instead, the world outside seemed too quiet, too still, like it was waiting. Maybe it was because I'd never driven this far alone. Maybe it was because my thoughts kept circling back to the hollow in Daniel's voice. Maybe it was because the closer I got to the coast, the more the landscape felt uninvited. Trees leaning in, waves crashing harder than they should, gulls gliding low as if watching. I shook my head and drove on. 2 hours later, the road narrowed into a gravel path that led toward the fishing docks. The air shifted, colder, thicker, charged with something I couldn't place. My heart thudded faster the moment the water came into view, glittering under the gray morning light. I parked, stepped out, and clutched the thermos of ginger tea like it might anchor me. But as soon as I walked onto the dock and looked for his boat, the breath caught in my chest. There it was, rocking, unattended. No Daniel, no gear missing, no footprints leading toward the water. Just silence, just emptiness, just a faint tremor of dread curling up my spine. And in that instant, before I could even call his name, I knew something was wrong, terribly wrong. And whatever I was about to step into, it wasn't the reunion I'd imagined. The first thing that hit me wasn't the cold. It was the stillness, a frozen kind of quiet that wrapped around the dock like it had been waiting for me. Daniel's boat drifted gently against the posts, nudged by small waves, but it looked wrong, too still, too untouched. And when I stepped closer and saw the keys still hanging in the ignition, my stomach tightened so sharply I had to steady myself on the railing. Daniel was meticulous. Forgetting keys was like forgetting to breathe. The wind pushed my hair across my face, carrying the sharp scent of salt and something else, metallic, faint, unsettling. I called his name once, half expecting his head to pop up from behind the cabin of the boat with that sheepish smile he used whenever he accidentally worried me. But the only answer was the slap of the tide against wood. I told myself not to panic. Maybe he'd wandered down the shore to clear his thoughts. Maybe he'd gone to look for bait, or shells, or a quiet spot to think. I stepped off the dock and walked toward the shallows where the sand was wet and smooth. The water licked at my boots, icy against the leather. The sun, still low, stretched long shadows across the beach, and for a moment I felt like one of them reached toward me with a warning. Then I saw them. Footprints. His first, Daniel's. I knew the shape, the stride, the slight outward angle on the left foot. But beside them ran another set, heavier, deeper, booted, someone taller or heavier, someone who didn't belong in the quiet place Daniel claimed was his sanctuary. I followed the prints to the old supply shack near the trees. Its door was cracked open, swaying with a soft creak each time the wind shifted. I pushed it wider and peered inside. Dust, cobwebs, empty shelves, a fishing net hung from a nail, frayed and abandoned. No sign of him, no sign of struggle, just silence, thick and heavy, like whatever had happened had already moved on. The longer I stood there, the more wrong everything felt. The coastline wasn't just quiet. It felt like it was waiting for me to notice something buried beneath the surface. I stepped back outside, kneeling to trace the footprints again with my fingers. The boot prints headed away from the beach, toward the tree line, where faint tire marks carved into the dirt. Daniel's prints stopped abruptly beside them. Mine hovered just short of that edge, heart pounding so loudly it replaced the sound of the wind. A whisper slipped out before I could stop it. Daniel, what happened to you? Fear brushed cold fingers along my neck, but curiosity, desperate, aching, pushed harder. I followed the path, leaves crunching softly under my boots. The deeper I walked into the trees, the darker the world became. The branches knitted themselves overhead, filtering out the sunlight, turning everything into muted greens and grays. That was when I heard it. Not a voice, not a footstep, just a faint beacon-like hum carried by the wind. I followed it instinctively, and soon the trees thinned to reveal a weathered lighthouse perched on the edge of a rocky bluff. The structure looked like it had seen too many storms and not enough repairs. An old man stepped out from behind it, wiping his hands on a cloth. His eyes squinted as he studied me, like he could see the fear hiding behind my composure. "Looking for someone?" he asked. "Yes," I said, my breath uneven. "My husband, Daniel. Tall, clean-shaven, usually wearing a navy jacket. Did he come this way?" The old man nodded slowly, too slowly. "Aye, I seen him." Relief bloomed in my chest, quick, bright, fragile. "Is he still here? Do you know where he went?" The man hesitated, glancing toward the woods, then back at me. "He weren't alone," he muttered. My heart jolted. "What do you mean?" Another hesitation. A swallow. A shift of weight from one foot to the other. "Came looking for him. A woman." The word sank like a stone. "A woman?" My voice felt thin, stretched. He nodded but wouldn't meet my eyes. "Didn't catch her name. She seemed worried or angry, hard to tell from a distance." A coldness bloomed in my chest, spreading wider with each breath. "Did she talk to him?" "Didn't see that part," he said, and the lie sat between us like a shadow. He had seen something he didn't want to say out loud. "Please," I whispered, "if you know anything." Another pause, then a soft sigh. He headed north, deeper into the woods. "There's an old trail. Used to lead to a cabin before the storms tore most of it down. Ain't much left now." I tried to thank him, but the words knotted in my throat. I could only nod before turning toward the path he'd pointed out. The leaves rustled under my steps, each one sounding too loud in the stillness. My mind spun with possibilities, each worse than the last. Who was the woman? Why hadn't Daniel mentioned meeting anyone? Why had he left his boat open, his keys inside? None of it fit the man I married. Halfway up the trail, I had to stop and lean against a tree. My breath puffed out in shaky bursts. A tremor rippled through my fingers. Not from the cold, from fear that felt too much like heartbreak. "Please be okay," I murmured, the words slipping into the forest like a prayer. But even as I said it, something else tugged at me. Doubt. The kind that comes from puzzle pieces that refuse to lock together. Had Daniel lied to me? Or had someone else forced him into a lie? The trail narrowed. roots reaching across the dirt like twisted veins. I pushed forward, my hands brushing rough bark and damp leaves. Every step felt heavier. The air thickened, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke. Old, distant, but real. That was when I realized I was close. Too close to stop now. Then I saw it. A cabin, hunched between two leaning pines, its roof patched with mismatched shingles, its porch half collapsed. Smoke drifted lazily from a tin chimney, curling into the air in thin gray ribbons. Someone was inside. I stepped closer, careful, silent. My pulse thudded so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. I reached the edge of the porch and paused, gripping the railing to steady myself. Voices filtered through the cracked window. One was low, urgent, impossible to decipher. The other froze me in place. Daniel. His voice, unmistakable, wrapped in tension I'd never heard from him before. Not fear, not anger. Something in between. Something sharp. My breath caught, suspended in my chest. He wasn't alone, and he wasn't supposed to be here. I edged closer, the wooden boards groaning under my weight. Every instinct told me to open the door and burst inside. Every other instinct, every wiser one, begged me not to. Because for the first time since I arrived on that shore, a new, terrifying thought formed in the back of my mind. What if I wasn't meant to find him? I leaned toward the door, listening, heart racing so hard it drowned out the wind. Then Daniel's voice rose, clear, strained, unmistakably alarmed, and that sound pushed me across the threshold into whatever truth waited on the other side. I didn't wait for courage to catch up. I pushed the cabin door open so fast it slammed against the wall, and the sound snapped through the room like a gunshot. Daniel spun around. First, eyes wide, face draining of color. The woman beside him stiffened, her hand flying instinctively to her throat. For a second, none of us moved. All I heard was my own heartbeat, loud enough to drown out everything else. "Amara," Daniel breathed, as if saying my name might steady the ground beneath him. It didn't. Not for him. Not for me. The air inside the cabin felt thick, smoky from the dying fire in the corner, but also heavy with something unspoken. Fear, guilt, recognition. I didn't know which belonged to whom. My gaze flicked to the woman. Younger than I expected. Braids pulled back. Eyes sharp but tired. The kind of tired that comes from looking over your shoulder for too long. She stepped forward just enough to show she wasn't afraid of me. "I'm Aisha," she said, her voice low but steady. "I used to work for your husband." The words hit harder than she intended. Used to. Daniel hadn't mentioned her. Not once. Not ever. And yet, here she was, breathing the same air as him in a cabin he'd run to in secret. My chest tightened, not with jealousy but with something colder, a realization I wasn't sure I wanted. I looked at Daniel. "Why are you here? And why wasn't I supposed to find you?" His jaw slipped once like he wasn't sure where to begin. There was a tremor in his fingers, one he quickly hid by sliding his hands into his pockets. "You shouldn't have come," he whispered. Anger bloomed sharp and immediate. "That's not an answer." Aisha exhaled softly as if bracing herself. "Maybe I should explain," she said, glancing at Daniel for permission he couldn't give. "I disappeared months ago because men from your husband's company came after me." I blinked. "What?" Daniel ran a hand down his face, the gesture slow, defeated. "Please, Amara, let me talk." His shoulders slumped, and for the first time I saw fear in his posture, not fear of danger, but fear of losing me. He motioned for me to sit, but I stayed standing. The floorboards creaked beneath his steps as he crossed the room, creating a small, uneven distance between us. "Aisha found something." His voice cracked on the next words. "Something inside my company. Something I wish weren't true." Aisha stepped forward, pulling a small folder from her backpack. The edges were bent, water-stained, handled too many times. I found forged contracts, she said, offshore accounts, shell companies bleeding funds out of the charity division, and executives who were willing to do anything to keep it quiet. I stared at the folder, feeling the weight of it like a stone pressing into my chest. Daniel ran one of the biggest philanthropic branches in the state. Those donations built schools, shelters, clinics, or, at least, they were supposed to. So why come to him? I asked, voice barely above a whisper. Because he wasn't part of it, Aisha said. He didn't know, but when he confronted them, things escalated. Daniel looked away, jaw tight. They threatened her, and when she tried to go to the board, she vanished before she got the chance. I closed my eyes for a moment. The pieces were falling into place, but none of them fit comfortably. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. Silence. He took one step toward me, then stopped when he saw the hurt in my expression. Because I didn't want this to touch you, he said quietly. I didn't want you looking over your shoulder. I didn't want to bring that darkness into our home. I let out a hollow laugh, shaking my head. You brought it anyway. You just brought it alone. His face contorted with something raw. Regret, maybe. Shame. I thought I could fix it. I thought if I found Aisha first, if I kept her safe while I gathered proof. He swallowed hard. I thought I could end it without dragging you into danger. And how did that work out? My voice cracked despite my efforts. I thought we didn't keep secrets, Daniel. I thought you trusted me. I do, he said, louder this time. More than anyone. That's why No, I cut in. That's why you shut me out, because trusting me would have meant facing this together. And you decided for both of us. The room went still again, the tension so thick it felt like it had weight. Aisha shifted uncomfortably, her eyes flicking between us. Maybe I should step outside, she murmured. Daniel shook his head. No. Stay. But his voice trembled as he turned back to me. I'm sorry, he said. I'm so sorry you had to find me like this. I wanted to stay angry. I wanted the fury to hold me steady, the way anger sometimes does when sadness threatens to pull you under. But the longer I looked at him, the exhaustion carved into his face, the fear hollowing his eyes, the more I saw the man I married. The man who carried too much weight and never learned how to share it. I wasn't scared of the truth, I said quietly. I was scared of losing you to it. He stepped closer, slow enough not to startle me. You haven't, he whispered. I swear you haven't. Aisha cleared her throat gently. We don't have much time. She held up the folder, her hands trembling now. Those men, they won't let this go. I came here because Daniel said he could protect me. But if they tracked me once, they'll track me again. Daniel flinched, then moved toward the window. He pulled the curtain aside just an inch, scanning the tree line. His breath hitched. They're closer than I thought. My heart lurched. Daniel, what do you mean? They found us before, he said. They could have followed Aisha here again. The floor seemed to tilt under me as reality shifted. All the fear, all the secrecy. This was why. Not betrayal. Not another woman. Danger. Real. Imminent danger. I opened my mouth to speak, but a sudden wash of white-blue light spilled through the window, cutting across the cabin in a sharp, unnatural beam. A car engine growled outside, low and threatening. Aisha froze. Daniel whispered a single word. No. The lights outside swept across the cabin again, brighter this time, cutting through the storm-dark trees like a blade. Daniel backed away from the window, his voice dropping to a ragged whisper. They found us. Aisha's breath stuttered. Mine stopped entirely. Then the crunch of tires on gravel snapped everything into motion. Before fear could pin me in place, Daniel grabbed my hand. We have to move. Now. His fingers trembled around mine, but his grip was firm enough to pull me toward the back door. Aisha followed close, clutching the weathered folder to her chest like it was the only thing keeping her upright. We slipped out the rear exit just as a truck engine snarled to a stop in front of the cabin. The wind hit us first, cold, violent, smelling of salt and oncoming rain. Above us, the sky churned with dark clouds, rolling in like something alive. A storm was coming, fast and unforgiving, but the danger behind us was worse. We sprinted toward the trees, our boots sinking into the damp earth. I glanced back once, long enough to see men spill out of the truck, flashlights slicing through the dusk. One of them shouted, "They're behind the cabin." My blood iced. Daniel pulled me harder. "Keep low. Don't stop." Branches whipped against my arms, but fear numbed the sting. The forest seemed to close around us, sheltering us and threatening us at the same time. Rain began as a mist, then thickened into sharp drops that peppered the leaves like stones. Aisha panted beside me. "The cliffs. They're close. There's a path." Daniel shook his head. "It's dangerous in weather like this." "So is staying alive," she snapped. A shout echoed behind us, closer this time. A beam of light flickered over a tree trunk just inches from my shoulder. Daniel cursed under his breath and veered left, guiding us through a narrow break in the brush. My chest burned, my legs screamed, but adrenaline pushed me forward. Then the trees parted. The cliffs emerged abruptly, a jagged precipice overlooking a furious sea. Waves crashed against the rocks below, sending up white spray that rose almost as high as the ledge itself. The wind was worse here, violent enough to shove us sideways if we weren't careful. Daniel turned me toward the edge. "Stay behind me." "No," I said, my voice sharper than I expected. "We stay together." His eyes flickered, fear and pride tangled in them, but he didn't argue. Not this time. Aisha pointed toward a faint path cutting along the cliffside, narrow and uneven, as if carved by storms rather than hands. "That leads to the shoreline. The lighthouse is visible from there." "We'll have to go one at a time," Daniel said. Before we could move, a shout came from the trees. "There!" 3 armed EE. Men stepped out, guns raised, expressions cold and focused. My heart thudded so loudly I could barely hear the waves. Aisha froze, clutching the folder like it might shield her. Daniel positioned himself in front of both of us, his arm extended, protective, shaking. "You don't want to do this," he called out. The man in front smirked. "You should have stayed quiet, Daniel." Lightning tore across the sky, illuminating everything in a violent silver flash. Then they advanced. "Run!" Daniel yelled. He didn't wait for us to obey. He grabbed my hand and pushed Aisha toward the narrow cliff path. We scrambled along the edge, slipping on wet stone, gripping at roots and branches for balance. The ocean roared below, a warning and a promise. Gunfire cracked behind us. A bullet hit the rock inches from my shoulder, sending shards flying. I gasped, ducking instinctively. Daniel shielded me with his body, pressing me closer to the cliff wall. "Go!" he pleaded. "Please, Amara, move." I forced myself forward, breath shallow, legs trembling. The path widened as we reached a small clearing, sheltered by a rock overhang, but it also trapped us. Ahead was a drop. Behind were the men. Aisha whispered, "We're cornered." Daniel scanned the clearing quickly, his mind racing. His eyes landed on a rusted fuel drum near an old fisherman's winch. Left behind, forgotten. Rainwater dripped down its sides, but the red warning label remained visible beneath the grime. He pulled a flare gun from his jacket. This might buy us time. The men approached slowly, guns steady, confident they had us trapped. One of them shouted, "Hand over the girl and the documents. We don't need the rest of you." Aisha's breath hitched. I stepped closer to Daniel, gripping his arm. "We have to distract them," I whispered. "Give ourselves seconds. Just seconds." But Daniel shook his head. "You're not risking yourself. Not again." "That's the problem," I shot back, voice trembling with more than fear. "You keep thinking I'm something fragile. I'm not. The men drew nearer. Daniel lifted the flare gun, but his hand wavered. He wasn't certain. He didn't know if the flare would ignite the drum or just bounce off uselessly. So I reached out, took the flare gun from his hand, and stepped forward. "Amara!" he choked. But there wasn't time to argue. I aimed at the drum, my fingers slick with rain. My heart beat so loud I felt it in my teeth. One step back, breath held, spine firm. "Get behind me," I said quietly. The men rushed forward. I fired. The flare hit the drum with a hollow clang, and for a heartbeat, nothing happened. The men skidded to a stop, confused. Then, a deafening explosion ripped through the clearing, heat blasting across the rocks. The drum erupted in a torrent of fire and smoke, sending the men scrambling, disoriented. The blast shook the cliffside, and Daniel yanked me backward just as debris clattered where I had been standing. "Go!" he shouted, voice raw. "Now's our chance." We bolted toward the continuation of the path revealed by the collapsing debris. Aisha ran ahead, guiding us with shaking hands. The wind howled. Lightning split the sky. Rain soaked us in seconds. But we didn't stop. We slipped, caught ourselves, kept going. The flames behind us shrank into sparks as we descended toward the beach. By the time we reached the shoreline, the storm had swallowed the world in gray water and roaring wind. But through it, faint, flickering, we saw a light. The lighthouse. Its keeper stood outside, waving a lantern wildly when he saw us racing down the path. "This way, hurry!" he yelled, his voice nearly lost in the storm. Behind us, the attackers stumbled onto the beach, shouting over the wind. But the lighthouse keeper had already sent a flare into the sky, a bright streak that cut through the storm clouds. Within minutes, the distant hum of engines grew louder, the Coast Guard boats cutting through the waves, lights flashing. The armed men tried to flee, but the storm boxed them in, and the officers were on them fast. When the danger finally broke, the world didn't quiet. It simply shifted. The noise of the storm faded into the background, overshadowed by my own pounding pulse. Daniel collapsed onto the sand beside me, drenched, shaking, breathless. Then he pulled me into his arms. "I thought I lost you," he murmured against my hair, voice thick with everything he hadn't said. I held him just as tightly, feeling the heat of his fear and the weight of his relief. Aisha stood a few feet away, clutching the folder to her chest, watching the flashing blue lights reflect off the waves. The storm began to ease, little by little, as if exhausted by its own rage. And as the first fragile hint of dawn broke across the battered coastline, I realized the real reckoning wasn't over, not even close. Because now that we had survived the night, we finally had to face everything that led us here. The storm had quieted by the time we made it back to the dock, but the world still felt shaken, like the earth itself hadn't fully recovered from what happened. The sky was a soft gray now, stretched thin across the morning like a washed-out blanket. I walked toward the shoreline slowly, my boots sinking into the damp sand, and stared at the tide rolling in and out. The same tide that had swallowed the footprints I once followed in fear. Now, watching the waves erase those marks, I felt something inside me loosen, like the grip of the night was finally letting go. Daniel sank down beside me, elbows resting on his knees, breath still uneven. He looked different in the daylight. Not like a billionaire, not like the man who carried half the city on his shoulders. Just a human being, stripped down to the simplest version of himself, tired, humbled, and suddenly so heartbreakingly honest. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The water filled the silence between us, hissing softly as it slid back over the sand. Finally, Daniel exhaled a shaky breath. "I thought keeping you away would keep you safe," he murmured. His voice was rough, like he hadn't used it in years. "I told myself if I carried the danger alone, it would die before it reached you." I didn't look at him yet. I let the words settle like pebbles rolling across the shore. "But you didn't carry it alone," I said quietly. You just carried it without me." His shoulders jerked slightly as if the truth hit harder than he expected. He scrubbed a hand over his face. "I didn't know how to let you in," he admitted. "Every time I looked at you, I saw everything I stood to lose, and it scared me. More than threats, more than the corruption. Losing you." His voice faded, trembling. That was when I finally turned to him. His eyes were red, the kind of red that comes from swallowing guilt for too long. I touched his hand, just lightly, and he startled, like he hadn't expected forgiveness to have a physical shape. "When I was a kid," I began, my voice gentler than I felt, "my father would disappear when things got hard. Doors would close, voices would drop, secrets would pile up until our home was nothing but shadows. And every time he came back, he swore he was protecting us." I swallowed as the memory tightened my throat. But all I learned was that love shouldn't echo with footsteps leaving. Daniel's fingers tightened around mine, almost involuntarily. "Amara, I'm not him." "I know," I whispered, "but when you shut me out, it felt like the same door slamming." The wind softened as if listening. Daniel lowered his head, shame bending his posture. "I hurt you," he said, without meaning to, without even realizing how deep the cut was. "You hurt yourself too," I replied, "carrying all that fear in silence." A long pause stretched between us, not heavy this time, just honest, raw. Footsteps approached softly from behind. Aisha stood a few feet away, the evidence folder tucked under her arm. She looked fragile in the morning light, but steadier than she had before. "The Coast Guard is ready to take my statement," she said. Then her gaze slid to me. I wanted to say, "Thank you." I blinked, surprised. "For what?" "For showing him what strength looks like," she said. "Not the loud kind. Not the kind that fists through doors. The kind that stands beside someone even when everything inside them is breaking." Her expression softened, almost apologetic. "He listens to you. More than he realizes." Daniel bowed his head as if the compliment hurt. I squeezed his hand gently, letting him feel I wasn't pulling away. Aisha hesitated, then added softly, "And thank you for not assuming the worst of me." She offered a faint smile. "Some people would have." I returned the smile. "Some people aren't running for their lives with proof of corruption." A laugh escaped her, shaky but real. "I'll come back once everything is handed over." She glanced at Daniel. "They won't get away with this, not anymore." "I won't let them," he said, voice firm for the first time since the cabin. She nodded and walked toward the patrol boat, the folder clutched against her chest like a small but defiant victory. When she was out of earshot, Daniel leaned closer to me. "You could have died," he whispered. His voice cracked on the last word, barely holding together. That thought kept tearing through my head all night. "If anything happened to you because of me." "It didn't," I said softly. "We're here, together." "But it could have." I met his eyes, steady. "Then don't make me watch you walk into danger alone again. If you're in the fire, I'm in it too. That's what we promised each other." His throat bobbed with a hard swallow. "I didn't think you were that strong." "I didn't think you were that fragile," I countered. That earned a breath of a laugh, quiet but alive. He looked at me the way he used to, like I was something he wanted to memorize, something grounding. We sat like that for a long time, letting the waves speak for us when words felt too heavy. He told me about the first night he suspected the corruption, how betrayal from people he trusted shattered something in him, how he convinced himself that protecting me meant hiding everything that scared him. And I told him about the little girl who once stayed awake listening for footsteps, praying they weren't leaving. About the woman I grew into, the one who refuses to be protected into silence. Little by little, the wall between us thinned. Not through dramatic vows or apologies shouted into the wind, but through quiet truths exchanged in the gentle hush of the tide. At one point, Daniel reached for my cheek, brushing away a stray tear I didn't know had fallen. "I want to be better," he whispered. "For you. With you." "We both do," I replied. "But we start by telling the truth." "All of it." He nodded, eyes softening with something that felt like surrender. Not weakness, but acceptance. "Then when we go home, everything changes." "Everything?" I asked. "Yes," he murmured. "The company, the leadership, the people who tried to bury this. I'll rebuild it with honesty, no matter how much it costs." "And us?" I asked, my voice barely carrying over the tide. He took my hand again, threading his fingers through mine. "Us, most of all." The sun broke through the clouds then, thin beams scattering across the water like gold dust. The light warmed my face, warmed the space between us, warmed the future we weren't afraid to step toward anymore. Behind us, the patrol boat's engine rumbled to life. Ahead of us, the path home waited. And as Daniel helped me to my feet, I felt something settle inside me. Not certainty, not perfection, but a beginning. A beginning shaped by truth, scarred by fear, and held together by the fragile, stubborn hope that we could build something stronger than what almost destroyed us. We turned toward the road, toward home. The story didn't end on that stormy shoreline. If anything, that night cracked something open. Inside Daniel's world, inside mine, and the weeks that followed felt like learning how to breathe again. The scandal broke first as a whisper online, then a headline, then a roar that spread through the city like wildfire. Cameras swarmed the company's headquarters, reporters shouting questions that carried every shade of disbelief. And through all of it, I watched Daniel straighten his shoulders, take a breath, and walk toward the podium with a calm I knew he fought hard to earn. I stood beside him, never behind him this time, as he faced the world with the truth. His voice was steady, almost serene as he explained the corruption uncovered in his leadership team, the misuse of funds, the threats made against those who tried to expose it. He didn't soften his words. He didn't shield himself. He spoke with full transparency, letting his vulnerability show in a way I had once thought impossible. "I failed to see the danger growing inside my own walls," he said. "But failure isn't refusing to fall. It's refusing to stand back up." Flashbulbs burst like lightning, but his hand found mine under the table, warm and sure. The room, for a heartbeat, seemed to quiet around us. Later, as we walked out of the building into a wall of journalists and bright midday sun, someone shouted, "Daniel, is your marriage still intact after everything that happened?" Daniel didn't hesitate. He lifted our joined hands and said with a soft smile, "Stronger than ever." It shouldn't have mattered what anyone else thought, but hearing it, from him, settled something deep inside me. Life after that slowly shifted back into color. Our home, once dim with silence and unsaid fears, felt warm again. Not because we decorated or rearranged furniture, but because we rebuilt our rhythms. Shared breakfasts became a ritual instead of a rushed habit. He brewed my tea the way I liked, letting the ginger steep longer than the directions because he knew I loved the stronger flavor. Evenings stretched quietly, phones set aside, his head resting on my lap as we talked about anything other than work. Trust wasn't fixed in a day. It never is. But it grew again like new branches after a fire. Fragile, tender, undeniably alive. One evening, Daniel walked into the living room with a glint in his eyes I hadn't seen in months. "I want to show you something tomorrow," he said. "What is it?" I asked. He shook his head, smiling. "Just trust me." The next morning, he drove us to my childhood neighborhood, a place with cracked sidewalks and faded murals, one I hadn't visited in years because the memories, they were sharp enough to reopen wounds. But as we rounded a familiar corner, something new came into view. A building I recognized, yet didn't. The old community center, once neglected and appealing, had been transformed. Fresh paint in warm tones, new windows, a renovated playground where kids now chased each other laughing. I stared, hardly breathing. "Daniel, what did you do?" He squeezed my hand gently. "I rebuilt it," he said, "in your name." I turned to him, stunned. The center had been the only safe place I had as a child, a lifeline, a refuge. Seeing it brought back echoes of who I was before life steadied itself under my feet. "Why?" I whispered. "Because you survived," he replied softly, "and you give that strength to everyone around you, including me." The words hit deeper than he knew. I blinked through tears as a group of kids waved at us from the swings, their joy loud and unrestrained. For the first time in a long time, I felt not just seen, but understood. Months later, when spring softened the air and the memories of that terrifying night had faded into something gentler, Daniel suggested we return to the coast. "One more surprise," he said, though his tone held no mystery, just excitement. When we reached the dock, it looked nothing like the haunted place I remembered. The water was calm, carrying the gentle rhythm of the tide. The gulls cried softly overhead, drifting on easy currents. Even the old lighthouse stood brighter, its paint refreshed, its beacon steady. We walked down the dock together. Daniel's hand brushed mine, fingers curling naturally around my own. "Feels different now," he murmured. "It does," I agreed. "I used to think this place marked the beginning of everything that went wrong." "And now?" he asked. I looked out at the water, at the horizon, stretching open and endless. "Now it feels like the place where everything started to make sense." He leaned in, brushing a kiss against my temple. "I'm grateful you came looking for me that day." "I'm grateful you didn't give up," I whispered. We stood there in silence, letting the breeze carry our thoughts. The world was quiet, not with fear this time, but with peace, the kind that settles slowly, like sand drifting to the bottom of clear water. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, the colors reflected across the sea, soft oranges, calm blues, streaks of gold painting the surface. And I thought about how I'd planned to surprise him months ago, hoping to fix something I didn't understand. But the real surprise had been the truth waiting on the other side of fear, the resilience we discovered, the love that didn't break but reshaped itself, stronger, braver, more honest. Daniel squeezed my hand once more. "Ready to head home?" I nodded, though part of me wished we could stay on that dock forever. The moment felt suspended, sacred, a reminder that storms can take you apart, but they can also reveal what was strong enough to survive. We turned back toward the path, our steps easy, our breaths steady, and behind us, the sea kept whispering its quiet promise, one that echoed louder than any storm we had faced.